My name is Matt Marino. I lead sales at Global Payments. As our company name implies, we are a global payments technology company helping businesses transact in a variety of different markets around the world. We're roughly 12,000 employees in 30 or so different countries. So anyway, if you're keen to talk payments later in the day, I'm your guy. But for this session, yeah, it's really all about sales coaching. And I suppose I've been fortunate enough to have had a variety of sales leaders who I've worked for. I've been fortunate to make a lot of mistakes and learn from those, as well as have a cultivated network of other sales professionals who I can lean on for guidance around hot topics. And one that keeps coming up time and time again is the effectiveness and particularly the lack of effective sales coaching. And so the format for today is really to, I've got some prepared content that should take, 20, 25 minutes. And then it's going to be kind of turning over to those of you in the audience to share what has worked within your own organizations, to share maybe what hasn't worked, and really kind of glean from your collective insight. I realize GDS is a UK company, but hopefully most of you in this room have heard of the movie Tommy Boy, or at least have seen it. It's one of my favorite sales movies. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's about a dim-witted character played by Chris Farley, who inherits his family's automotive brake manufacturing company shortly after his father passes. And a couple of weeks into the job, he realizes that the company is nearly bankrupt. And so he decides he's going to take it upon himself to go and win new business and hit the road and sign up a bunch of clients to save the company. And with him is this arrogant, kind of condescending business assistant played by David Spade. And the movie is a comedy because Tommy Boy has never done sales before. And so nearly every engagement is him walking into a client meeting and him inadvertently breaking something or lighting something on fire, and the client telling him to leave the place immediately. And all the while, David Spade thinks he's being helpful with coaching, but he's just doing it in such an arrogant, kind of condescending way that it just makes Tommy Boy more stressed and more frustrated. And it's not until late in the movie, which is what this scene is here, where they're at a diner and it's the breakfast time. And Tommy Boy successfully convinces the waitress to turn on the fryer so he can eat fried chicken wings at 10 in the morning. But it's the first time in the movie where he's able to combine confidence, relatability, and influence to ultimately get something to happen in his favor. And David Spade's character is able to see that and convey it in a way that really resonates with Tommy Boy. They go on to be successful with their next appointments. They're able to secure enough business. The plant is saved, everyone gets to keep their jobs, he keeps his girlfriend, everyone's happy, the movie ends, everything's great. Of course, if this was in real life, Tommy Boy would either have been fired or quit much, much sooner. And so you look at employee attrition is no joke. I mean, some of the recent stats from CEB still show that sales rep turnover remains the highest of any department within business. And not only that, but folks who are new to sales turn over twice as quickly as those who have been in it for a while. And a lot of us think, oh gosh, if only my business was Apple or Amazon or Microsoft, that we'd have more clout and that our employees would stay longer. And that's not the case. I mean, employees are leaving the top 10 tech companies just as quickly. And it's not just sales rep turnover that's a problem, but executive turnover is an issue as well. And this should be alarming for all of us, because I imagine most of us here are selling to CMOs, CIOs, chief technology officers. And so, if the average executive is only staying for 2.5 years, and if your reps are turning over as frequently as they are, it means that that 40% of your pipeline is inherently at risk just due to turnover, right? That's pretty wild. But the most alarming thing, and the thing that should perhaps scare all of us, is this figure there. So the average head of sales, the average CRO, now only lasts 16 months in the job. Last year, that figure was 19 months, and in 2010, it was 25 months. So there's been a compression of time that the average sales executive stays in the position. So it means that all of us are inadvertently at risk too. In other words, like, you can't be just good, you've got to be great. You might be able to afford to have one bad year, but you certainly can't afford to have two. And so what do we do? It's as sales leaders, our livelihood, our careers, our business is dependent on scalable, repeatable revenue. And so that often comes down to developing the right sales process, hiring and coaching the right people. But you look at the disconnect, and this is really illuminated here by a study done by Xvoyant, where they surveyed a bunch of sales teams, and they said, how many of you have a defined sales process? And not surprisingly, most companies that they talked to, sure enough, have a defined sales process. When they asked those same companies, how many of you have a defined coaching process? For all the reps on your team, it was a much smaller number. So many companies are really leaning in heavy on the process and not so much on coaching. They then asked the sales leaders, how would you rate your effectiveness as a sales coach? And of the people who replied, 83% said that they were awesome at sales coaching. Of the reps who got surveyed, they asked, how many of you find your coaching meaningful? And only 13% of the actual reps said that they got any value or any meaningful insight out of their sales coaching. And so perhaps the most alarming thing out of this study, and it's not on this chart here, is that 48% said that they never got any coaching whatsoever. Again, so clearly there's a disconnect, and I don't think that sales leaders are doing this intentionally. I think most believe they're helping. Most believe that they want to have their team be successful. They simply fall into these 6 primary crimes of sales coaching that makes it ineffective. The first one is really all around inconsistency. I think how many of us have known managers or have had a manager or have been a manager where your one-on-ones are erratic, meaning they come at any time, the subjects range all over the place. And so there's 2 parts here that are worth noting. The first is the frequency should be non-negotiable with anyone on your team, meaning that you should have a fixed time in your calendar of when you're having a one-on-one with the reps or the frontline managers on your team. And you may ask, okay, well, what's an appropriate amount of time to have those meetings? And I would say they largely depend on your sales cycle. If you are a business that has a faster sales cycle, you probably need to have more frequent one-on-ones compared to if you are if you're selling enterprise services where it takes quarters or years, those one-on-ones likely don't need to be as frequent, but in general probably need to be somewhere between weekly and monthly. The other thing that needs to be consistent is a focus on the topics that are going to be talked about. I mean, there's nothing scares a rep more than just showing up to a meeting and not knowing what is on the agenda. So a great way to solve for this is simply to have a shared document, like a Google Sheet, where both you and your reps can input agenda topics for what you plan to speak about. And I would suggest that in these sort of coaching sessions, an ideal agenda should be half inputted by you and the other half inputted by the rep. You certainly don't want to dominate the conversation, and you don't want to show up with nothing to talk about. But you'll know that you will have been successful here if your team members, your reps, or your frontline managers are coming to the conversations with a list of things that they need help with. Because it means that they are self-aware of their own challenges and opportunities, but also trust you enough for help. And I was at Dreamforce a couple of years ago, and this may be a little hard to read, but I took this of a snapshot from one of the presentations, and this worked for this company, it may not work for yours, but I loved that his approach was very clear so that everyone on his team knew, here's when we're meeting, here are the topics, here's the outcomes that we expect to talk about, and here's why. And I thought, again, this framework worked for him, but again, it provides a level of clarity that really all reps require. And the last point on this one is to provide coaching in real time when it's appropriate, right? If you come out of a sales meeting or a sales call, started to drop. And so I'd go to her again and say, hey, like, how are things going with so-and-so? And same sort of sentiment. Yeah, things are good. We open, we share, we talk a lot. And sort of what she fell into was this notion that a coaching session or a management discussion is just about a relationship, but it doesn't have any sort of commitment to change. And all of us as leaders, I mean, that's a big reason why we are in the roles that we are, is we need to be the right sort of catalyst for change. Just as our companies are changing, the market is changing, our own solutions are changing, our reps need to change as well. Right? We're not looking to have professional relationships with the people on our team. That might be a nice byproduct of what we're doing. But ultimately, like, conversations do not pass as coaching. And this is hard because it really goes against all of the other kind of primary relationships that we may have in our life. I mean, you can imagine coming home to your spouse or significant other and you say, I expect you to change tomorrow. It's probably not going to go over too well because there's comfort in dependability, in consistency, in reliability. Whereas in business, it's a little bit different, right? We're all about continuous improvement and adaptation. And just as your reps are seeking commitments from your prospects, you need to be getting commitments from them on the things that they need to work on. I mean, you're familiar with Mark Roberge, former CRO of HubSpot. Yeah, I mean, he wrote the great book, was it the Sales Acceleration Formula or something? Yeah. So he gave a great analogy on this about how sales coaching is a lot like trying to coach someone on how to golf. Now, I don't know how to play golf that well either, but the analogy he gave is that if you're starting on how to learn golf, the coach doesn't say, okay, you put your feet in a certain place and you hold the club this way and you move your hand this way and you arc your... There's too many steps involved. And that what they do is they start with just one thing first, let you master that, and then they bring in something else, and then they bring in something else. Because if they were to throw 20 things at you all at once, you're likely going to forget those. And so it's the same thing with sales coaching. You want to start with one thing and coach the hell out of it until they learn, adapt, and feel confident in it. And also that you should not rely on what I call like spreadsheet coaching, where you have a list of variables that apply to everyone on your team. Yes, quantitative numbers are important, but if you are to do this, at least make it qualitative in some measure. Got this from a buddy of mine, and again, maybe a little hard to read, but what I like about this is, and this was done more at a quarterly basis, but there's elements in here that speak to the goals and drivers of the reps as individuals and are more nuanced than how many calls have you made, how many meetings have you set up, how's your reliability within Salesforce, and so forth. All right, crime number 3. This is one that I fell victim to early as a manager, and it was pointed out to me in one of my one-on-ones where I was prepping for this meeting. I called my team member in, and I had my Salesforce dashboard open with all the reports. I had a couple printouts open. He sat down at my desk, and I immediately launched into it and said, "Hey, it looks like your attrition is 300%, worse than what it was 6 months ago, and your pipeline forecasting has been off for 7 months, and your applications and underwriting are sitting 2.5 times longer than the average rep." And I remember him just looking at me and saying "Matt, where did you get all this?" And so I fell victim to ambushing with data. Rob Jepson loves this term, and it essentially means where you are showing up to a coaching session with information that the rep doesn't have access to. And there's no other way to instill a lot of fear than by showing up with some sort of material or insight that, again, they just simply don't have access to. And so you know you're kind of falling into this trap if you have some sort of secret, hidden Excel document that has figures that the rest of the team doesn't. And so you should ask yourself, do your reps regularly access the same information that you do? And more importantly, are you making it easy for them to access that level of information? In other words, are they going to like one place to get information on their pipeline and forecasting and numbers, or are they having to log into multiple systems? And of course, like as managers, as leaders, like we run 2 numbers, we run 2 process, and your reps should ultimately be doing the same. I mean, they should care about those numbers as much as you do. But ultimately, we don't want to weaponize the data, right? It's just there. And our role is really to focus on the context behind the data. If content is king, then context is God. And part of those discussions are all about, it's not so much the data itself. Yes, it matters, but it's what you're doing with that matters more, right? What are you going to do next? What action are you going to take? What did you learn from that? Just like any sort of major sports metaphor or analogy, that's what all the best coaches do. All right, the crime number 4 is dominating the discussion solely on the pipeline. I've known a manager who he'd bring people in. He had this nice mahogany desk. He'd turn his screen around, and it'd be a long Salesforce report. And the one-on-one would start with, all right, ABC company, you have it closing of this date. Is that correct? Okay. This value, is that correct? All right. How many emails have you sent? How many calls have you made? What's your confidence on this closing? And he would just go through every single opportunity in the Salesforce report. And that would be the extent of the one-on-one. And of course, talking about deals, talking about the pipeline is a part of our job and part of what we should be doing, but it shouldn't dominate a coaching session. All this does is really just turn up the stress and not the performance for the reps. So a good way to ask yourself if you're falling victim to this is, are you pressing the more button or the how button? Because for the reps, it's not, they know they need more deals. It's more about how can you provide the right feedback on how they're structuring their deals, how they're prospecting, how they're closing, how they're managing internal politics, how they're managing their career. That's what matters most. Again, just as we run towards data, we run towards process. And part of our job is to coach and mentor our team members to see that. Because with the right process should, over time, yield the right results. All right, crime number 5, and this is something that Steve spoke about earlier today, and that's not having any sort of automated activity visibility with what your reps are doing. I think as he spoke about, it used to be that many pipeline reviews or many one-on-ones were the manager sort of interrogating the rep. How many calls have you made? How many appointments have you set up? When did you last meet with this client? And then CRMs came along, and then the reps were keying it in themselves, but it was still sort of laborious. But nowadays, you have so many great software solutions that are out there. I just put a few up on the screen here that do that on the rep's behalf, so that they're not having to spend the soul-sucking effort of kind of manual data entry. So if nothing else, like make sure that you have some sort of email cadence solution for your team. So this allows you to see open rates, reply rates, forward rates, as well as, of course, manage a outbound campaign of emails to prospects. For those of you who do a lot of sales over the phone, a service like Gong or Chorus is great because they're able to transcribe the call and provide some really interesting analytics on the ratio of time that your reps are talking versus the time that a prospect is talking, as well as it picks up keywords that are being used. And then what I've found really extremely helpful is client engagement software. Yeah, in the past I've used DataHug. I know the guys from Clary are here as well. They both kind of, I think, do something pretty similar. But what I love about this is their applications sit on top of your email and calendar client. They're not reading any of the sensitive information. They're just looking at the to and from recipients in an email or calendar appointment. And so what's great is like I can log into this and see, okay, for a particular opportunity, when was the last time we emailed them? When was the last time we called them? How many appointments have we had? And it shows this for the entire account. And the rep doesn't have to enter this at all. It just sits there, adds it to the opportunity record within Salesforce. And so then I can look at a very effective heat map and see, okay, for the deals in my pipeline, I've got 3 people who are engaged with this client, 1 that's engaged with this other client. The circle, the size of the circle represents the opportunity size, and the color represents the health of the opportunity. And in this example with DataHug, the color, the health, is based on the number of people who are engaged, both on the client side as well as internally. Generally, like a more engaged client with multiple buying influences are going to be more likely to buy than someone who is not engaged or is single-threaded. And so services like this, again, they're relatively inexpensive, they're relatively easy to add on to Salesforce, and so certainly something to leverage. All right, and the last one is becoming a superhero every time you need to. And I think this is the easiest trap to fall into, and oftentimes when we get reps who come to us with an issue or a question, we want to go and solve it ourselves. We want to say, hey, don't worry about it, I've got it, I know a board member, or I know how to pitch this, or I know what email to be sent, or let me pick up the phone and talk for you. The problem, of course, is this isn't helping them, and this isn't sustainable. And so really, instead of focusing on these tasks yourselves, it's really about coaching and teaching them on the steps that they need to take. Like they need to know what you would do in that situation. So yeah, to quickly recap, first crime is inconsistency, so make sure that you're consistent in the timing of your meetings, make sure that you're consistent with the topics that are going to be discussed, make sure that the relationships you have with your reps as well as the relationships with your frontline managers are rooted in commitments to change. Again, like we're not in the business of having professional relationships. Those are fun, but they likely won't help you have sustained success. Number 3 is don't show up with data that is a surprise to your rep. They should be going to the same source of information that you are. Make sure that your coaching sessions are not dominated by simply talking about the pipeline. Leverage some of these great software applications that we spoke about. And the last one is really our job is not to become Superman or Superwoman at a moment's notice, but how do you train your team to be those superheroes, to be highly effective in what they're doing in their careers and so forth. So yeah, as you can see, again, the gap between the sales coaching effectiveness of what managers think that they're giving and what reps actually believe they're receiving is wide. Hopefully we can shrink that. But yeah, really now, I want to turn over to the rest of the audience. Again, this is, these are 6 here, but I'm keen to hear from all of you. What has worked within your own organizations, your own teams, as you think specifically around sales coaching and effectiveness and ensuring that everyone on your team has a plan for sustained success?